give an even bigger hand and round of applause to George Monbiot.
Thank you so much, and sorry for the slightly late start. Being an uncooperative crusty turns out to be hard work. So, we find ourselves in this extraordinary situation where almost no one on Earth wants the thing that's happening to happen, and yet it still happens. No one has voted for the destruction of our life support systems. No one has voted for climate breakdown, for environmental breakdown. No one has voted for the gross climate injustice that is happening around the world with its massive disproportionate impacts generally on the poorest and most vulnerable communities. And yet it still happens. The reason for this is that the system that claims to speak in our name does not speak in our name. We have a system which claims to be democracy but functions as a plutocracy, or perhaps more accurately, a pollutocracy. The pollutocrats are running the world. We have impacts on the rest of the living planet and on the rest of the planet's people that we do not want to exert. We are dragged into being participants in injustice when that is none of our aims. No one here I know wants to be a participant in injustice. I don't think anyone in the world wakes up in the morning and says, I want to be a participant in injustice. And yet we all find ourselves forced into that position by decisions that are made above our heads. And this is why, for me, that third pillar of Extinction Rebellion's aims is so important, to create participatory democracy. Extinction Rebellion talks about a citizens' assembly, which is one important aspect of participatory democracy, but by no means the only one. There are lots of different ways of enabling the world's people to determine how the world should be run. And amazingly, almost none of them are being used. We have a political system that is run on the lines of the 18th century, when the fastest way of taking records and disseminating information was the quill pen, and the fastest way of communicating with people was horseback. And yet we still live under this system which is plainly not fit for purpose. And because this system is so crude and so removed from the voices of the people, this absurd idea that you vote for us every 4 or 5 years and then we're going to represent you for the rest of that time, and our decisions will be your decisions because you voted for us. Well, actually you probably didn't vote for us because only 30% of the country voted for us, but never mind, that gives us a mandate to decide on everything. That system is bound to cause disaster. It is inherently corrupt, but it's also highly corruptible because it is so detached from the people's decision-making power. Then corporations and oligarchs can move into that space and capture it. And our ridiculously lax campaign finance rules make that very easy indeed for them to do. And so when governments make decisions that nobody wants, when governments force us to be climate criminals, force us to participate in ecocide, that's because we are not being represented, but other interests instead are being represented. And we see, in fact, The Guardian has just launched a series just this afternoon, about an hour ago, called The Polluters, about the power of the fossil fuel industry and how it has just got its hooks into government really from the outset. And it looks in particular at the timeline since 1965, which turns out to be a critically important date, because this was the date, first of all, on which Lyndon Johnson told Congress climate change is real, that industrial emissions of carbon dioxide are heating the planet and will continue to do so. And when the American Petroleum Institute told its members the same thing and said we could see significant changes to the global climate by the year 2000. They knew what they were doing. They were fully aware what was going on, and their response to this knowledge, was it to stop the catastrophe from unfolding? And in fact, there were several oil industry scientists who used the term catastrophe at the time. Was it to stop it from unfolding? Or was it to prevent public knowledge and public action on that catastrophe, which would curtail their own activities? Well, I think you all know the answer. What they did was consciously and knowingly to launch a program of ecocide. Now, ecocide is a very important word, and I hope it's a word that we're going to hear a lot in the coming months and years. It's a concept which was promoted in particular by the brilliant lawyer Polly Higgins, who very sadly passed away a few months ago, but her legacy persists, and her aim was to turn ecocide into an instrument of international law alongside genocide and other crimes against humanity. Because actually ecocide is the greatest crime against humanity of all. We're talking about the destruction of our life support systems. And if that extends far enough, nobody survives that. None of the other species, the remarkable species with which we share this fantastic planet, survive that. There will come a point, if greenhouse gas emissions are allowed to proceed far enough, that climate breakdown turns into annihilation, because it triggers runaway feedback processes that could eventually give us a climate rather similar to Venus's. In other words, where all the water goes into the air, forms a pretty well solid blanket, doesn't allow any thermal radiation to escape, and we cook alongside with the rest of life on Earth. And we're pretty close to the edge of the habitable zone of the solar system as it is. It's not as if we have a great deal of ecological space or physical space to play with. And we are being potentially tipped into that process which leads, if it's not stopped, inexorably towards total annihilation. So ecocide is not just a very serious international crime, it is the ultimate international crime, because it threatens to destroy everyone and everything. And yet, at the moment, it is not even recognized as a crime. Now, as I say, we are all unwitting and unwilling participants in this great crime against humanity, and not just humanity, but all the rest of the living world as well. But we are not the drivers of that crime. It is a really very small handful of corporations and the exceedingly rich people who own them and run them who are the drivers of that crime and drag us along with them, using their very powerful lobbying activities, their funding of politics, their ownership of most of the media. And let's stop calling it the tabloid press, let's start calling it the billionaire press, because that's what we're talking about, and we should always know what we are talking about. They use these instruments to shut down political choice, and in fact to replace political choice with something they call consumer choice. And interestingly, when The Guardian went to some of these fossil fuel companies for comment, having done this investigation, which you can read online as of last hour, this investigation which found the extraordinary list of crimes for which these people are responsible, some of them said, well, it's not up to us, Gov. If people want to choose to use our products, they can, and if they don't want to, they can't. So just shedding all moral and legal responsibility for what they were doing. But actually they have so engineered the global political and economic system that we can't opt out. They build the physical infrastructure, they build the political infrastructure, which makes us all complicit in the crime they have commissioned. And this is oligarchic rule. This is governance by a few people of the great majority, and is about as far removed from democracy as one can imagine. And this is especially the case when you recognize that those who are most responsible for the problem are the least likely to be affected by it. We know that the global poor will get hit first and worst by climate breakdown. In fact, many of the global poor's communities already are being hammered by climate breakdown. And the rich, by contrast, are hit last and least. And yet there is an almost linear relationship between the amount of money that people have and their environmental impact. And of course, as you go on up the scale, you see this almost logarithmic growth of those impacts as you get into the echelons of the extremely rich. Because not only are they using private jets and luxury yachts and have got super homes all over the world and have these massive footprints of their own, but they are responsible for the entire system which is pushing the rest of us into the position of being climate criminals. So our revolt against environmental harm is also a revolt for global justice. The two things are inextricable. You cannot separate the one from the other. It's very interesting analysis, I mentioned it on the other stage, by Kevin Mackay, a Canadian professor of sociology, showing that the societies that have collapsed, the thing they have in common is ruled by oligarchs. That's what all of them had in common, because the trouble with oligarchic rule is that even if everybody else can see that we're heading in the wrong direction and that direction needs to change, if they have power over everybody else, they can resist and prevent that change from taking place. And the short-term interests of those oligarchs, well, you can see it in the billionaire press every day as they rip into us for trying to preserve a habitable planet, as they attack us for every possible means that they can find because we're trying to save their lives. Their short-term immediate interests are being allowed to trump even the interests of their own descendants, let alone the rest of humanity and our life support systems. So to fight against environmental breakdown, to fight against climate breakdown, means also fighting against the political breakdown that has allowed those people to come out on top and dominate our lives. That is a fundamental thing that needs to change. And so we can't leave it to a political system that has been captured by them to implement that change, particularly a political system which operates entirely through this amazing, coarse, aggregating thing called, which we call laughably, representative democracy. It's a sort of unrepresentative non-democracy is what governs us at the moment. And that's all we've got in the 21st century. I mean, what an extraordinary thing this is when there's been so much innovation. Participatory budgeting, developed first in the south of Brazil. The participatory city building of the kind that you see in Reykjavik at the moment. The pooling of expertise by digital means that you see in Taiwan with their V-Taiwan program. There are so many fascinating new ways of producing collective and sensible decisions, and yet we are not taking them. Instead, we have a system which is entirely governed by the notion of presumed consent. I was elected 3 years ago, therefore I, as Prime Minister, as long as I can persuade Parliament or push my party through Parliament to get this done, I have a mandate to do whatever I want in that time. Even if it wasn't even in the manifesto. Even if it was in the manifesto, no one would have voted for it. Even if actually, because there were 200 issues in the manifesto, no one knew what they were actually voting for at the time, and even if 70% of the adult population of the country didn't vote for me anyway. Now, we don't accept the idea of presumed consent in sex. Why should we accept it in politics? Now, I don't want to completely get rid of representation representative democracy. I think we need both. I think we need representative democracy tempered with participatory democracy. People's assemblies, citizens' assemblies, constitutional conventions, a refinement of decision making by all the interesting new democratic tools which are now available. Participatory budgeting, not just at the local level, but at the national level as well. What they discovered in Porto Alegre in the south of Brazil was that participatory budgeting completely broke open the corrupt system that had governed the city up to that point. And when the PT government in Porto Alegre, the Partido dos Trabalhadores, came in and saw that huge amounts of money were being poured into the infrastructure budget and almost no one in the city was benefiting except for the very rich developers and the very rich people in the certain favoured parts of the city, and all these pork barrel contracts which were being given to someone's brother and someone's sister and someone's husband. The whole thing was basically run by a sort of infrastructure mafia. They saw that this system was simply not working for the people of the city. And so they did a very bold thing indeed. They said this budget is now going to be controlled by the people. And we're going to use this really very clever and strategic new political structure to determine how that budget should be allocated. And astonishingly, every year they had 50,000 people sitting down together setting that budget through a process of devolving upwards from local people's assemblies and devolving that decision making upwards. Astonishingly, within a few years we saw a complete turnaround of people's basic life expectancy, their life standards, their living standards. Sanitation improved out of all recognition. Clean water, which many people had never had before. Much better primary health care. Much better maternal mortality statistics. Much better infant mortality statistics. An end, effectively, to infant hunger. Much better primary education. And much better public transport. They all started happening almost instantly because the system was being run not by the so-called representatives of the people, but by the people. Now, obviously, this being Brazil, and we all know what's been happening in Brazil, that sort of thing, unfortunately, has been pretty well crushed. But the principle has been demonstrated, it has been established, and there's no reason at all why, especially with all the new digital technologies, including blockchain technologies, which have been developed since then, it can't be extended not just to big cities like London, but to entire nations, in fact, potentially to entire regions. And this is a critically important thing. I mean, it's starting, even if we just look at the infrastructure budget. At the moment, we are building more and more roads and airports and other forms of infrastructure that lock us into the fossil economy, that make it almost impossible to remove ourselves from being participants in this great crime against society and crime against the living world. And the only reason all that completely inappropriate development is happening is because we have not got our hands on the levers of that development. We know full well we need public transport. We know full well we need more space for people and less space for cars. There are now cities developing in the world, 60% of their land area is devoted to cars. And if you look at the public land area, you're talking 80 to 90% of the spaces held in common. The car was designed as a servant of humanity. It has become our master. And yet we're being locked into that system by decisions taken in our name but not by us. So no longer can they act in our name. We will act in our own name. We, the people, should make those decisions, and we have the tools that enable us to do so through participatory budgeting and participatory democracy. And the more you think about this project, the more radical it becomes, because if you start from that premise that it's the people who should decide, very quickly you have to ask yourself the question, which people? And you say, well, obviously all the people in Britain. But you say, well, hang on a minute. If we are imposing impacts on the rest of the world and effectively dumping our pollution in the form of greenhouse gases on people elsewhere, people who've played almost no role at all in climate breakdown, because in most of the world's people, their emissions are absolutely tiny, then we are behaving towards them, even if we have full participatory democracy, as our representatives are behaving towards us. We're imposing decisions to which they are not party. So then you start questioning the arbitrary boundaries which have been thrown around political units. And you say, should the nation state be the primary locus of political decision making? Well, it doesn't seem to have served us all that well so far. Especially when you start looking at the politics of climate, where globally what we see is an almost perfect circle of finger pointing where everyone says, well, we're not going to do anything until they do something. And they say, well, we're not going to do anything until they do something. And it comes all the way around the world until the finger's pointing back at you. And there's this meme been going around since this absolutely catastrophic program that David Attenborough made in 2006, which basically blamed the Chinese for climate breakdown. It was quite an extraordinary, it was called The Truth About Climate Change. It could not have been more untrue. Tell the truth. And the BBC has been phenomenally bad at doing that for a very long time. But he basically blamed the Chinese for climate breakdown. They were the only force which was identified in the whole program as being responsible. Fossil fuel companies weren't identified, governments weren't identified, but the Chinese consumer was identified as the problem. And that created this massive wave across this country of people saying, well, there's no point in us doing anything, it's those Chinese who are responsible. Now, at the time, the average Chinese citizen had a carbon footprint 1/3 the size of ours, and almost all of that was in manufacturing industry, producing stuff for people like us to consume. It was so grossly unfair. I mean, it's this outrageous, ill-researched, ill-thought-out idea, but it's taken hold. It still does today. You can see it on social media every day now. People say, well, if you really want to change things, why don't you go to China? And you say, actually, because we are in the belly of the beast right here. This is the engine room of the machine. But that, that's really stuck, that idea. And so, we say, well, we're not going to act until the Chinese act. And the Chinese say, well, why should we act if you're not acting? And you realize, wait a minute, what is this thing which them being the Chinese and us being the British, and this is the dividing line? Them and us? What is this idea that we should be divided by these really quite arbitrary things called nation states? It's an extraordinary thing, but if you were to walk across Europe in the mid-19th century and ask the people you met, what country do you belong to, most people would not have been able to tell you. Because the nation state was a very, and this is well-established research which shows this, the nation state was so weak and so little part of people's lives that almost no one in continental Europe identified as a citizen of a nation state. They would identify as someone who belonged to their village and the region around their village or the city and its hinterland. They might see themselves as being part of a city-state, which might have been a real city-state or a sort of virtual city-state, or possibly part of an empire, the Habsburg Empire or the Ottoman Empire, for example. But almost no one on continental Europe saw themselves as being primarily a citizen of any particular state, because that was not the primary unit of political organization. And we have this peculiar tendency always to imagine that the situation we're in is the way it's always been and always will be. We project that the present back into the past and forward into the future until the future just becomes repeated instances of the present. And that locks us into a mindset which makes it very hard then to break out and find solutions to the massive predicaments that we face. And I think one of the solutions we should start exploring is getting beyond the nation state as a primary unit of political decision making. Because what it does is to set us against each other. It alienates us from other people. It says they are the other. It is us and it is them. It allows politicians to whip up wars for no good reasons because we have to fight them. It allows politicians to say it's in the national interest for us to build these roads and build these airports and continue with this disastrous program of economic growth, even though it's plainly against the global interest that we should do so. And now I believe in the idea of subsidiarity, that we should make decisions at the smallest possible unit where those decisions can reasonably be made. So a lot of the decisions we make nationally can be brought down into smaller political units. You know, do it locally where you possibly can. Do it regionally if you have to do it regionally. Do it nationally only when you have to. But also, a lot of the crucial decisions need to be made, in fact are being made, at a bigger level, which is the global level, but we have no voice at that level. Global power is being exercised, but there is no such thing as global democracy. Instead, we have a series of institutions that have no democratic mandate whatsoever, and yet go around the world lecturing countries on good governance. When did you last hear the government go to the people and say, what should we tell the World Trade Organization? What should our position be on investor-state dispute settlement, for example? It just doesn't happen because we are not involved in that decision-making process. So, and there's all sorts of really interesting thinking about how we might do this with world assemblies, with the democratization of global power by all sorts of means. But what we're looking at here is a democratic revolution. A democratic revolution at the local level, the regional level, the national level, and the global level. Because only then can we begin to connect the victims of climate breakdown with the perpetrators of climate breakdown. Only then can we start to break out of the political system which makes climate criminals of everyone in this room, even though no one in this room wants to be one. Only then can we start rolling back the life-destroying system that governs this planet. Only then can we start asking the really big questions like, do we actually want economic growth? Because we're not going to hear that question asked in Parliament. It would just be laughed out. And yet, I suspect that quite a few people would like to ask that question. Raise your hands if you'd like to ask that question. Yeah, quite a few people. Because, you know, it's such a fundamental question. I mean, here we are. The current level of economic activity is already breaking through planetary boundaries. There's a science of planetary boundaries created by people like Johan Rockström and others at the Stockholm Institute, but also many other scientists around the world identifying the points at which we go through the limits that the planet can take. We actually break through those limits of those environmental limits which are set by the physical realities of the world. And already we're breaking through many of those limits, and that's at current levels of economic activity. So it becomes instantly obvious that anything that raises those levels of economic activity, which is the thing we call growth, is going to push even further past those planetary boundaries, causing catastrophic effects, especially as the feedbacks start to kick in. And yet, what is the fundamental aim of just about every government on Earth? Economic growth. Another word for ecocide. It is planetary destruction that we're talking about, and we valorize it and honor it and say this is the highest aim of any society is economic growth. Never mind that nearly all the fruits of that growth are captured by a tiny number of people. It's incredibly maldistributed. Never mind that if we were to raise everyone to $5 a day, through economic growth alone with its current levels of distribution, the average global income would have to be over £1 million a year for everyone to have an income of $5 a day. It's an incredibly inefficient way of actually solving poverty. And in fact, because it's destroying our only form of prosperity, which is the living world, far from solving poverty, of course, it will massively exacerbate and accelerate it, and in fact destroy people's lives entirely. So, and when the OECD and the IMF and people are challenged like this, I say, well, look, we're not asking for a lot of growth. Seriously, we do actually agree that some countries are growing too fast. 3% a year would be about right. Now, economists use this rule of thumb called the rule of 72, that if you want to know how quickly a doubling time is, you divide 72 by the percentage rate of growth. So divide 72 by 3, you get 24. That means the economy doubles in 24 years. All the economic activity, the cumulative economic activity there's ever been that we have at the moment in the world, that doubles in 24 years, and then it doubles again, and then it doubles again, so that by 2091 we have 8 times the level of economic activity we have today. Well, that might work if the planet was going to be 8 times bigger than it is today, but we live on a finite planet. We quite simply, physically, literally cannot accommodate that level of economic activity. And yet it remains a central political demand. Why?
Can I butt in for a minute? It's really important.
Yeah.
There is mass civil disobedience happening right now. The police are arresting people and they're taking our roadblock away. I'm sorry to take any of your crowd. So there's a mass...
No, use the microphone.
Oh, hello. Can you hear me? There's mass civil disobedience happening right now on that. There's a mass civil disobedience happening right now on the corner down there. There's masses of police and people are getting arrested. If anybody would like to go and support, just to be in numbers and sing loving chants, there's lots of live stuff happening whilst police are arresting people. If anybody is arrestable, maybe you should form an affinity group, and if anybody would like to do that. But if people want to go down there right now to try and help us keep the roadblock, that would be wonderful. Sorry, George.
No. All right, off you go. See if I care. Well, look, that's what we're here for. So please, go if you can and go if you want, and I won't be offended. So, well, look, I'll start bringing this to a conclusion because there are other things to do, as we see. We have to take back control. Not take back control, as Dominic Cummings says, not as Boris Johnson says, but genuinely take back control for the people. And not take back control against other people, but take back control with other people. Take back control with the premise that there is no such thing as other people. There's only us. And in that spirit, in the spirit of love, love for other people, love for everyone, including those yet to be born, love for the rest of the living planet, love for the better people that we can and should become, we rebel. We rebel against extinction, and we rebel for life. Extinction!